Hello and welcome to this activity called Discussing the Upcoming Election. My name is Derek Francis. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Manager of Counseling Services for Minneapolis Public Schools. This presentation is designed to help teachers, educators, families, and community members with strategies for discussing the election. The content is age appropriate from elementary all the way up to adults, so thanks for checking it out. To get us started, it's important to have some community agreements. Conversations about the election or race can be met with nervousness or hesitation or avoided because they can be hard. And so since we know that, here are some agreements when having these discussions. In addition, it's important that we remember our values as a classroom, as a family, or as a community group. So it's important to listen to understand. Also use I statements to share your perspective. Find some ground rules, find some grounds for similarities and unity. Think before speaking, and want to help promote healthy discourse. To get us started, let's think about some warm-up questions. In 3 words, describe your feelings and emotions after the 2016 election. And how have your conversations about the election gone in the past? And what is one hope you have for this election, besides the results coming out in your favor? So if you're doing this as a lesson and want to pause so that there's time for dialogue, go ahead and do that. The 2020 election is coming up November 3rd. And so it's important that you utilize your voice to vote. Voting is a way to make a difference in your community. It's important to be aware that there's communities that from underrepresented populations that have not always had the opportunity to vote. So it's important that we're able to exercise that freedom that we all have. And then at the end of the day, I believe that by having these discussions and learning how to hear people, we'll have a healthier community. So some things we'll learn today will be the history of the election process, how to have empathy and understanding for someone with a different perspective. We'll talk about some strategies for having political conversations, and we want to build cross-cultural relationships. So here's our words of the day. The first one is voter suppression, and that is strategies used to influence the outcome of the election by discouraging certain groups from voting. And you'll see there on the picture to the right, there's times in our history where people had to fight and demand their right to vote. Our other word of the day is the Electoral College. That's representatives in each state who cast one electoral vote at each election. Why is this important? It's because politics impacts our lives. Also, it's important to have this conversation because we know that last election, there was many incidents that began to occur in schools that were harmful and discriminatory. And so we want to make sure we can have some conversation and understanding about each other. And also we want to fulfill our country's mission and value of liberty and justice for all. So we're going to watch a short video that gives you a little bit about the history of the election.
U.S. election, Donald Trump secured the presidency despite getting almost 3 million fewer votes than Hillary Clinton. It could happen again, and it all comes down to how the president is actually elected. When Americans go to the polls in November, they won't technically be voting for Donald Trump or Joe Biden, but for members of something called the Electoral College. The word college simply refers to a group of people, or electors, with a shared task to choose the President of the United States. The system goes back more than 200 years. The founders of the United States wanted to establish a democratic system, but were concerned that a direct popular vote might lead to the election of an unsuitable president. Electors were settled on as a compromise. Each state was given a number of electors based roughly on the size of its population. Today, there are 538 electors, and the successful presidential candidate will need to get a majority of these, at least 270, in order to win. In most states, the candidate who wins the popular vote gets the support of all of that state's electors. For example, whether a winning candidate gets 99 or 51% of the vote in California, they would still receive all the state's 55 Electoral College votes. That's why it's possible for a candidate to lose the popular vote across the country, but still secure a majority of electoral college votes and become president.
Some election history, women were not able to vote until 1920. So the 15th Amendment was passed in 1870, and it on paper gave African Americans the opportunity to vote. But unfortunately, voter suppression began, where there was poll taxes and literacy tests and physical violence to keep people of color, African American people in our country from voting. Uh, and it's a bummer. And then the 24th Amendment in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 removed those barriers in voting.
This means that Donald Trump will be the 45th president of the United States.
My parents told me in the morning, and I was just surprised that someone would actually vote for him.
I didn't believe my mom. She told me, and I thought she was like joking.
Everything was kind of overwhelming to me, and I was really confused.
I can't even begin to explain what was going through my head.
I feel really scared for what's going to happen to America.
I'm still kind of in a state where I keep on checking to see that, like, it's not a dream, and I feel like it's a dream, and I feel like it's just a nightmare.
I think Hillary would have made a really great president, and she would have been the first woman president of the USA, and it's like a missed opportunity.
I think part of the reason why Donald Trump became president was because he speaks his mind, and even though basically all of his ideas are really offensive and awful, people still admire him for that.
Donald Trump was a bit more charismatic, and he had a very straightforward message, and Hillary's message was a bit more muddled and a bit more confusing, even though it was a really good message.
A lot of people were undecided and just said, hey, why not? I'll just vote for Donald Trump. It probably won't make a difference.
A lot of people don't like Donald Trump, but they don't like Hillary either, so they just decide not to vote.
It's just a matter of who you don't like more.
He's racist, he's sexist, and I don't understand why our country would elect him.
It just makes me kind of angry and sad, because after that tape came out, and then just women who voted for him without noticing that he doesn't treat women like they have any self-worth. I would want a Trump supporter to know about me that I'm not a terrible person. I just have different views than they do. And just because I dislike the candidate they support doesn't mean I dislike them.
Just because I support Hillary Clinton doesn't mean that I don't have things in common with other Trump supporters.
Just because you don't agree with someone's views doesn't mean that you hate them.
All right, so take a moment and think about yourself and your own reactions. Think about your responses to these questions, and maybe as a class, share out what you're thinking and feeling, and listen to the people in your class that are sharing, or if you're at home, the people that are sitting with you. I think it's important that we have some talking points, some strategies to go into having conversations about politics. And here's some to recommend for you. So starting off with just knowing some proactive strategies, such as just understanding that you won't agree with everything anyone says, even if they're within your same party. So having to understand that people have different ideas and opinions, and how to understand and listen. Be mindful of your tone and how you're talking. When you're in conflict, maybe the way you may speak louder or lower, and then making sure you're just mindful of that. Social media, it's important for us to be mindful of what we're posting on social media during this time, and be mindful of how we're speaking to people, especially because children are watching of all age. So maybe you might have a younger brother or sister that are seeing some of the things you post, and they're like, oh, wow. Or maybe it might be a parent that you're seeing things from. So that includes us, me as an adult, being mindful of what I post.
I've heard some experts say, well, just talk about something else. Do you believe that, or do you think that we actually can have these productive discussions?
I mean, I definitely think we can have these productive conversations, and I think they have to have some type of guidelines to it. And when I say guidelines, just, ways to communicate with each other. And one thing is that we have to try to avoid this oppositional positioning where we're using terms like I disagree or no, that's not so. instead using words and things that you've heard me talk about more, about being more curious. Like, can you help me understand why you are voting for this candidate, or what is important to you when you're considering who to vote for? Right. And then as they're sharing their perspectives, acknowledge when they have good points and good spaces that they're sharing things in. If we can do that, it makes it a little bit more easier for us to have those conversations.
For some of these things, Michael, I don't know if there is common ground, right? When it comes to issues of civil rights or racism, I think this is why some people have a hard time having political conversations with people that when you look at their views and you categorize it as, especially, I think, racist, you hear that quite a bit when people are having political conversations.
For sure. And I think we have to be mindful of what is really political. I think sometimes we get the definitions of political things confused. Like, so in my perspective, political is something around saying, hey, should we have a light rail in our city? Should we be levying our community for more tax dollars for the schools? Right? Versus some things that to me are just not political, like should women have equal pay as men? That's not political. Does Black Lives Matter? That is not a political statement. Those are things that we shouldn't be politicizing, but they have been politicized in our society.
One of the recommendations you have is really just breathe.
So take a moment and share one strategy you heard that you can use when engaging in a conversation about the election. The Minneapolis Public Schools mental health team, a collection of social workers, psychologists, school counselors, and other mental health supports and agencies put together a list that you can use for talking points. We want to also make sure that we are mindful of some strategies when having conversations about race. I know that at times when you're having conversations about the election, the issue of race comes up. And obviously it was a discussion topic during the debates. And so it's important that we're aware of the recent events and how these events impact people of color. These events are tied to your identity of feeling discriminated against. So when topics like this come up during a time of politics and a voice for change, it really does impact how you feel. I encourage you all to push through the discomfort of the conversation. Put aside your own biases and imagine the other person's pain, and then carry their burden. Call out the injustices that you see. Call it out for them. You know what? I've seen that happen before, where someone's done that, and it just feels good having someone speak up as a friend. And also, it's important that we're building cross-cultural relationships. The pictures I have on here are my daughter. She's in the top right, and I want to see this world be a place for racial healing and connection with people from different backgrounds. And so I hope that for her, you see the George Floyd Memorial site here in the Twin Cities, and we have so many schools in our district that are nearby there, and students and families. And so it's important that we have on our minds how to keep our neighborhoods safe. Breonna Taylor is on the picture there below, and I think about my daughter, and I think about if Breonna Taylor was my daughter, the heartbreak of losing your only begotten child. In Minneapolis, we want to make sure that our students and staff feel supported, that we can have these healthy conversations. So at the end of the day, students, it's important to know that it's you that we really care about and like. I want to wrap up with a little bit from one of my favorite educators, Mr. Rogers. And I want Minneapolis students to know that it's you we like, just the way you are. Your skin, your eyes, your feelings, whether old or new. Take care, friends, and have a good rest of the day.